Greetings all. We have everyone on mute. Kevin, I want to make sure we get you in here. Can you join us, Kevin? Are you there?
I'm here. Yep. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I see our guest of honor, Dave Cushing. Oop, that was the wrong one. Let's see. Hold on one second. David, can we hear you? Do you see something on your end?
Hearing you. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Let's see. I've seen a lot of familiar faces here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting away in just a second. We're waiting on a couple more people to bring in and unmute. Hi, Allie. I want to make sure we have good audio on you. Can you unmute?
Yes, sorry, I'm
No.
trying to switch to a microphone though.
No worries. And Kevin, we still have you, right?
Still here.
Perfect. I'm just going to wait on Amanda here. We might be able to get underway. Oh, there's Amanda. Hey, Amanda, I'm going to unmute you just to do an audio check. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep, you're there. Sounds good. All right. Kevin, I think we can get underway. Let me get my screen up here.
What?
This happened. Yeah, David brought a guest. Fantastic. We are very pet friendly here at ACC.
My dad's dog. She followed him down in the basement where I work when I'm here.
Awesome.
My parents' 60th wedding anniversary, and she managed to get stuck behind a door, and then just went. Woof.
Awesome. Love
When
it.
she gets off my lap, she'll go right upstairs. All right. Say hi to the nice people, Harper. All right.
Good. Good to have our guest here. And you too, David.
Yeah, right. And the dog too.
Anyway, welcome everyone. Great to see you. We are doing our maybe a little bit more than quarterly ACC Washington update. We are recording this for those that aren't able to make this meeting. Have a number of updates, and I think this is going to be a very busy month as well. Then we'll get into some details here. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to our fearless chair of the Advocacy Committee, Kevin Spitz from Mead and Hunt. Kevin.
Thank you for having me. I had some fears, but we were able to pass that debt ceiling bill. So at least some of those fears have gone away in the last couple of weeks. But we have other fears to deal with here moving forward. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. I love seeing this great showing of everybody too. Seeing we have 53 participants here already. And I know we have a lot of other people who have registered that hopefully will be joining us and watching the recording later on. So just to introduce once again the ACC Advocacy Committee, I am the chairman for this year, Kevin Spitz from Mead and Hunt. I'm helped out by Vice Chairman Allie Fields from CMT, our YP liaison, Amanda Sheridan. Past chair is Michael Higdon, who's a great resource for us. Board liaison is Chad Nixon, and TJ Schultz is our staff liaison here with ACC. So some of the core mission of the Advocacy Committee, I think it's important that we always kind of recognize that advocacy is one of the strategic goals of the Airport Consultants Council, and we work really hard in this committee to try and advance those goals. Just to talk a little bit about from a ACC level what those goals are. Goal number one is to identify and promote new opportunities for maximizing financial resources and options available for airport development projects. Number two is to identify and advocate innovative approaches to accelerate regulatory decision timeframes and maximize flexibility to deliver airport projects more efficiently. And goal number three is to foster a competitive business environment for private sector airport development companies. And when I talk to people about advocacy, there's a lot of different realms of advocacy and what we can do as airport consultants. A lot of it comes from that legislative space, and that's a lot of the work that we do, especially with FAA reauthorization coming up. Working with our friends at the FAA, we talk about advocating in the regulatory space, but there's also other advocacy we can do just by being airport professionals as we are and kind of talking up airports and showing that how much they support our communities. In addition, I think advocating also for our businesses and for diversity within our businesses is a really important piece of the advocacy puzzle. So hopefully some of you attended the Advocacy 101 that the Young Professionals Committee put on a couple of weeks ago. I think there was a lot of very, very good information that they shared there as well. And I know that there's a recording of that too, that I'm sure there'd be a chance to get to if you didn't sign up for that in the past. So moving on, I'd like to introduce our special guest today, Mr. David Cushing. David Cushing is a manager in the FAA Airports Financial Assistance Division in the Office of Airports and is a graduate of Rice University and UNC Greensboro. He is responsible for administering the Airport Improvement Program, including Supplemental Discretionary AIP, the 3 COVID relief airport grant programs, including airport concessions, rent relief reimbursement programs, and the Passenger Facility Charge Program. He also oversees all of the bipartisan infrastructure law programs for airports. Before his current position, Mr. Cushing served as manager of the Los Angeles Airports District Office from November of 2011, and he started his FAA career as an airports compliance specialist in the Office of Airports. David, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm pleased to be coming to you live from my parents' basement because that's the kind of guy I am.
Very, very glad to have you. Very glad to get to meet your dog. If we hear any barks on my side, then forgive me as well. Because we're always just one vendor or one lawnmower away from a really loud call here.
Yes, I know. Oh, I know what you mean. Yes, the phone may ring. I should have taken care of that, but it's kind of quiet. So I'll proceed. I am, in fact, David Cushing, the manager of the Airport's Financial Assistance Division. I'm always surprised about how people know more about me than I put in my bio. So I guess that's very 2023, isn't it?
Sure is.
So I have been having an aviation career, an airports career since the 90s, and I've enjoyed it quite a lot. And I'm 2 years and 10 months from retirement. So there you go.
Well, congratulations, getting close.
But I guess I'll get started out with a quick update on where we are. I'll go through a list of information. I'm going to just speak to it because I'm kind of not wanting to use PowerPoints as crutches anymore. And also I don't want to scoop things, and I can maybe be a little bit more up to date if I just riff off of it, right? So let's start out with our regular AIP. Of course, you know, we've issued now our second Airport Improvement Program Notice of Funding Opportunity ever in 2023. And we hope we didn't confuse you too much, just right enough. But with that, we got a decent start on the year, and we're about a third of the way through AIP with the announcement in May. That was A4. And I think we'll be seeing an A5 here in this month, and that together will put us about halfway through AIP. I don't want to get too much in the details, but certainly we're approaching $700 million of entitlement out the door and $440 million in discretionary out the door in May. So we'll add a little bit more to that coming up here in June, and then have a July and August, which should be huge because we'll have a lot more carryover to make nice, beefy discretionary grants with. So very much looking forward to that. Of course, we also have our supplemental appropriations going on. We have 21, 22, and 23 that are active. 21 is the last supplemental that we've done that did not require a NOFO and did not have congressionally directed spending, otherwise known as earmarks, after a fashion. That was $400 million appropriated with some set-asides for our admin and other. I think TFR came out of that. That's the temporary flight rules reimbursement for closed airspace for presidential movements, which continued into the Biden administration from the Trump administration, and maybe some other expenditures. But together, we believe we've issued. I had to be a little careful with this because the figures I got today seemed a little high to me. So thinking we're about at 70 grants at about $350 million, maybe a tad more obligated and out the door for supplemental 21. That's very important for supplemental 21 because it expires and also gets rescinded in a sense. It's simply the money that's unobligated out of supplemental 21 becomes no more on October 1st, 2023. So I think we've got about 13 more grants and 16 projects to get done, and $20 million, something, 25 million, $30 million to go. So please get those grants obligated. Certainly don't dally on a grant offer that's sitting. If your clients are looking for a pen, loan them yours so that they can sign the grants and get them so that I can stop worrying about it. Of course, they need to get their bids in order and cooperate with the ADO. We will be, I'll be pushing these because we want to make sure we get as close to all of that money obligated at the end of, well, I'd like it done next month. So let's keep moving on supplemental 21. Of course, supplemental 22 and supplemental 23 are completely different stories. They're more money, $550-ish each, but a lot of that, about half of it, is in congressionally directed spending. Now, the thing about congressionally directed spending is it's not subject to a NOFO, and we don't have much discretion over it. So we vet them. We make sure they're procured correctly. We go through all of our requirements for issuing a grant, then we issue the grant. So we've done, I think we're closing in on about 20 grants for supplemental 2022, and that's about $60 million out the door. When I say out the door, obligated under grant. I don't have any figures on any payments on those grants. Supplemental 23, of course, is new, and we've just got a handful of grants for just a few $1 million for supplemental 23. Of course, those means the grant agreements are prepared, the checkbooks are loaded, and ADOs are able to make those grants, and I'm able to approve them, which I do, every single one. So that's the current status of supplemental in terms of grants issued. Of course, supplemental 22 and supplemental 23 also have a discretionary component that are both subject to NOFO. We are at the supplemental 22 NOFO that was actually issued in calendar year 2022, December 28th, I think it was. So we are in final stages of approving the list for awards, and that I'm hopeful that that will be announced in the heat of the summer, sometime like that. I'm hopeful, and that soon to be followed by a supplemental 23 NOFO. You know, it is in draft. Of course, we don't have to reinvent these NOFOs every time, although kind of, because the administration keeps changing all the boilerplate that goes into them. But we're well on our way with that. if any of you are familiar with the supplemental 23 appropriation, there was a lot of authorizing type language about what the secretary may do for supplemental 23 or for 23 in general, including some novel ways for us to spend money, including sustainable aviation fuels, resiliency projects, actually resiliency improvements. So we're looking at how to integrate those and how to weigh them against other projects that may not be sustainable aviation fuels or as resilient to a degree as others are. So we're figuring that out, and we hope to get that out maybe this fiscal year. It's possible. Get the NOFO out. Now, of course, supplemental 22, we have until 2025 to obligate, in 2024 to obligate, and supplemental 23 we have to 2025 to obligate as that happens. So with AIP, you know, the job that I initially took back in 2019 was just AIP and supplemental. That was it. It's moving ahead pretty nicely. I mean, regular AIP is for 23. Our AIP grant program and approval is on target. I mean, where we are with grants obligated at this time, not obligated, grants announced. We're doing okay. But grant obligations are lagging. We're just over $300 million in grants obligated. So let me know, or let your PM know if you're waiting for a grant offer and you think it should be forthcoming, and don't let grant offers sit around, because we need to get these grants obligated. It's still work to get them obligated. It's a little easier these days. COVID taught us how to do this all without having to stand at a copy machine, at least not on our end. So let's take advantage of that added efficiency and get those grants obligated. I guess I don't mind telling you, for those of you that are in the know, carryover is on target with last year's carryover. So it's hard to say what's going to happen at the end of the year. We certainly got a lot of carryover early this year, which is why we were able to get any discretionary grants attached to any of these grants, any discretionary funds attached to any of these grants. So that was really good. So it could be that we've brought forward carryover, so it is artificially inflated, but going into a year without an authorization with a whole bunch of carryover always makes me a little perplexed. So again, let's process the grants. Let's resolve that carryover. Let's get that discretionary converted and funded. This all takes time and effort to do, and puts us in a decision bind at the last minute. So we'd like to go now. Now is good. So I ask your clients to get moving, or help them find the wherewithal to get moving. And I'm sure, you know, I say that with respect, because I know our team is very worked, very worked. So I'm going to ask for patience at the same time. I ask you to hurry up, and I understand the irony of that. And that's the most government employee kind of thing I do, and I understand why. So, but I hope we reciprocate with the patients. But we're all only doing this to make sure we get all this money out the door and spent on projects which make us safe and efficient, and keep up with the demands on the system. You know what? I might pause and Kevin, it may be up to you, but then that is really all I had for AIP, other than some side notes. Would you like to have some questions and answers on AIP, or should I dive into Bill and other programs? It's totally up to you.
I think that's a great idea. Anybody out there have any questions on what David's spoken about so far, or any questions about the AIP program? Feel free to add those to the chat, or you can come off mute.
You know, I love that question, because I'm a little bit, yes, AIP is impacted if FAA reauthorization doesn't pass. If we don't have a reauthorization, we can't get started with the program. We don't have the authorization to do it. In the past, at least in terms of employment of the staff, if we have either an authorization or an appropriation, we can kind of keep our people going. But it's sort of the witching hour in 2020. for, because those are both, we need both of those because the reauthorization is expiring. It doesn't mean we can't do anything, but we can't really do AIP because we need authorization for AIP. We don't need authorization for bill. And we don't need authorization for wrapping up the COVID programs. I'll get to that in a minute. COVID relief programs, those are already authorized. And we have a peculiar appropriation for operating expenses. So that is maybe a little up in the air, but I would think that it would probably keep us in business, but I really don't know what will fall out from that. But no, there's no ability to do anything but prep work. I mean, we can still work on the ACIPs. We can still do all of that stuff. We can still, but a grant coming out the door with no authorization, that's not going to happen. For regular AIP. A supplemental could keep going, I believe.
That's
It is a
interesting.
bit of a new world. Yeah.
Any other questions regarding AIP right now? If any come up, please add them to the chat or come off mute and let us know. But David, we can move on to Bill if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think I will. Okay, so Bill, where do I start with Bill? Well, Bill is in its second program year. Yes, it was passed in fiscal year 22. 22 has been announced and awarded, and we are obligating on ATP and FCT, and we're obligating on AIG. Airport Terminal Program, Federal Contract Tower Program, and Airport Infrastructure Grants. Airport Infrastructure Grants are the fully entitlement formula grants that are allocated to each airport in a way kind of similar to entitlements or kind of similar to some of the CARES allocation formulas. And then, of course, ATP and FCT are parts of associated grant programs, which are purely discretional and subject to NOFO, and AIG is not. So let's start with AIG. So over the 2 years, the 2022 appropriation or the 2022 release, they were all appropriated in 2022 as it happened, the nature of the bill law. But the money becomes available at the beginning of fiscal year 22 and the beginning of fiscal year 23, and then 24 and 25 and 26, 26, yes. So that is ongoing. We're about at $1.1 billion obligated of AIG out of both 22 and 23 allocations. So that's out of about 5.8 billion. From our perspective, that seems a little slow, but it's the beginning of the program. And what we're noticing is there's a lot of small AIG grants that are going on proration grants with AIP projects. So they're picking up the scope that additional scope that doesn't mean match. It's additional scope. All the funds need to be matched. And so, I mean, we could say get moving on AIG, but I'm not going to ask that specifically. I mean, we do get questions like, why isn't this getting spent? I do think it will go up. Understand there is a fourth year sweep or potential sweep of AIG that can be taken by the Secretary for Discretionary Grants. So you don't want to let any year's money sit for that long. So make sure you at least keep up with that, but I would like to do better. In any case, we see you're getting your clients are getting their feet under them with it. And we're happy to see it go towards grants that need to be fully financed or get that extra scope or accelerate the project and get it done more efficiently. That's all to the good. So I'm happy to see it, but you know, a little higher numbers wouldn't hurt. As far as upcoming with Bill and ATP and FCT, I would expect 2024 NOFOs to hit early. The good thing about the Bill programs is that they're stable and they're discrete and they're not as jangled up as AIP. They're a little easier to go forward. and do the same process we did last year. They're discrete in the sense that discretionary is discretionary and formula is formula, which makes the math a whole lot easier. There are some confusions with that. And in fact, we're making sure we're spending all the dollars we can by doing some amendments and making some changes. And you'll be seeing those too this summer. But I would probably expect the 2024 ATP NOFO before the end of the fiscal year, and FCT NOFO at the beginning of the next fiscal year, something in that line. But keep your ears to the ground. Is that where you keep your ears when you get an early sign? I think it is that ATP NOFO could be earlier than September, maybe a fair bit earlier than September. So that is Bill AIG. I'm sure I have some more details on that, but I thought I could even share a little bit of a PowerPoint, but I thought I'd get through these high points first and then do a little menu of bumping into a PowerPoint. And then also too, there's other conferences going on right now, and I don't want to scoop anybody with a piece of information that gets out that is a little too precise. I have a tendency to do that. But I'm happy to answer some Bill questions, the ones that I can't answer.
We wouldn't mind a scoop here if you want to give us one.
Yeah, I know. I know this crowd. No,
We have a question.
Be careful.
Question of anything still left in COVID?
Let me get to that. In fact,
let's
that's nearly my next topic. I was going to put that at the very end, honestly, because I figured that would be the biggest. I have a whole bunch of talking points on that.
I suppose I had a question. My understanding through the program was that each year the airports are going to continue to get their apportionment. So when will we see the third year apportionment become available for airports?
Right. Well, we have to do some figuring on it. I can't remember. It was pretty quickly after the end of the fiscal year. We can start doing some calculating, but then we need to vet it and it needs to be reviewed. But I wouldn't expect it to be any later than it was. I mean, that 24 should be about the same time it was for 2023, about calendar year.
Yeah,
I don't think the issue is it's odd because A, it's not exactly like AIP. B,
right.
Congress is mucking about with how AIP is done still. C, we don't know if they're going to muck about with how they do bill. It would seem to me that adjusting post-COVID should be over, but I don't know. We'll see. Those are still confusing and they still give us heartburn. And I mentioned the carryover target earlier with AIP. We have a rollover feature with AIG. Your unspent balances roll over, but it's just available to you. It doesn't carry over. It doesn't convert into anything. But it's still of some concern with AIP carryover, in that if we got to watch out the AIP formulas, and now we're guessing on the formula we're going to get in 24 and advise Congress of the workability of it. So we're in the middle of doing that, and I'm not going to discuss that anymore. But we have to keep an eye on it very strongly. And that, again, like all of these, they're just similar enough to confuse them for each other, but different enough to be critical when you get it wrong. I call them invisible snakes, and they're everywhere. Invisible poisonous snakes, and they're everywhere. But other than that, it's fine.
Well, to touch discussing AIG just a little bit more, the other one part of my understanding is that maybe some airports are waiting to build up some of that carryover before they
anecdotally, that's what makes sense. In many cases, right, the entitlement is roughly what AIP. It's in that area. Of course, it's not, because the formula is different. But that, let me see. That is not it. This is it. No, I don't really quite have the information on that. I guess we know that the AIG is $3 billion a year. It's probably a little bit less. That is $2.9 billion.
Sure. 2.9
million, a little less than 2.9 billion. So we're carrying over more than half of that in fiscal year 22. And of course, fiscal year 23 is not worth thinking of right just yet.
Okay.
That's not. No, I'm sorry, it's not more than half of it. Yeah, it is more than half of it. We carried over more than half. Well, more than half, almost 2/3. So
And FAA is still processing AIG grants on a rolling basis, or are there
oh
any
yeah,
deadlines?
yes. In fact, we call them announcements. We call them ripples. In fact, it's getting confused. In fact, that was one of the things I was going to need to ask Robin about. It's amazing. When I took this job, I thought that the stuff about AIP was so boring. I was going to have a really hard time to remember it. I cannot believe I'm the person that remembers insanely boring features of all of these programs. And in fact, I may remember more of it than anybody else on the planet. And I just can't believe it. I would never thought I was going to be that guy. But in fact, I get a little nervous about making observations about this because it is one of the newest things. And I have such a competent management team on it that I let them handle it. So I don't want to get them in trouble. But I guess, again, we're watching it, but we're not alarmed by it. We do think that, in fact, you're right. It makes sense that folks would be banking this. And I'd really rather not see any more distraction from this money that can sit for a bit, confuse people's decision-making about money that does expire, right? So don't pay attention to this dollars over here that's going to be, I mean, that's kind of a bird in the hand. Don't not grab the one that's in. And that's when we're going to talk about CARES ARPA or CARES and ARPA.
But the concern, or maybe it's an imagined concern, I don't really know, is we have this after 4 years, any money you haven't spent goes back into discretionary. And so what about that 5th year? If I want one major 5-year project with all this money, is there any concerns about having to do that early or not having that, I suppose, a portion
we
that
will
5th
help
year
because
before
this is on a rolling basis. So
Yeah.
it's the 2022
Yeah.
money that's going to expire in 2025 or 2025, right? So we're going to definitely spend the oldest money first. We're not going to let you take newer money. I mean, that we're very good at that because, in fact, we do that with CARES. I mean, with our AIP. So it's really only that. So if you're really lagging, yes, you should not do that. That is subject to sweeping. I would keep an eye on that. For example, fund year 2022 is we're wanting to see those balances go down. Right
Sure.
now, it's almost $1 billion of fund year 2022 is obligated. This is not a carryover table. This is a obligated table. So that means that well, really almost $2 billion still needs to come out of it. So we're
That's
watching it. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's good to know, and good for us to
Mhm.
keep in mind, especially as we get probably into next year more than right now.
Yeah.
We had a question from TJ about, do you have any information to share regarding how much bill funding is getting carried over from year to year? And I guess we.
Oh, I kind of think I kind of got to that. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I really only have 1 year, and I just told you kind of what it was.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Carried
out
over.
there?
It doesn't really carry over. I kind of want to. It remains available, right?
Sure.
So, and since it's still first in, first out, so we're going to spend it first. We do track ATP and FCT a little differently. I mean, we spend all of that money. I think we can mix it. This is another question I'd have for Robin, but I don't think we really need to. So no, I don't think we are doing that. So we are treating those more discreetly. Again, I should just hold my tongue because I'm not quite sure about that answer. Or we do this proration, which we've been doing, which is confusing, but which has been effective. So when the audits come, help us out, say we did it right. But in any case, it is worth keeping an eye on. I appreciate you helping your clients do that. Please do. They should certainly not have a 10-year window of decisions of what to do with something. It should be 3 years, something like that. Have a plan to do so. At least spend that oldest money and yeah. All right. So
Cool. Let's move on to you can move on to COVID Hope it really fun.
Let's see, where was I going to go? I think I want to go a little bit to Buy American. Now I got to find my.
Oh, okay.
Here we go.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just put all the. Right. So we got our new Buy American guidance and forms on the website today or just this week. So these incorporate our BABA procedures, which we have gotten at least a degree of approval from the Department of Transportation that what we're proposing to do is correct. And as it happens, because of the way policy and law from Build America, Buy America was structured, there was a realization that Buy American and Buy America existed already, and that we were to choose one regime which was the most appropriate and rigorous, and that looks a whole lot like Buy American at this point. Partly because of the nature of the procurements that your clients do and the nature of the projects that we fund. So there is a format in there, and there's forms and explanations on our website, the airport's website at FAA. I just found out this today, guys, so I haven't inspected it myself to see how it works. But please take a look at that, and of course, work very closely with your ADOs. And type 3 waivers are still kind of the basic way that you go ahead and just demonstrate compliance with Buy American. It's not different. We'll still be doing type 3 waivers. I know type 3 waivers are a little bit of an anomaly, and even the rest of the government is realizing that a type 3 waiver is not so much a waiver, it's just a way of demonstrating that you're complying with Buy American. At least that's the way I look at it. We're showing compliance, and I would also say take great care when doing procurements under alternative delivery methods. When of course, we can't do a type 3 waiver on a supply and equipment list and specs list that doesn't exist yet. But when you share your lists with the ADO, probably ought to come with a type 3 waiver and be prepared to follow the instructions on our website. And if you have questions on a broad nature, not about a specific airport, you can call or email Carlos Fields. He's our BABA man, or Agent 007, I call him. He doesn't know why, it's kind of silly, but in any case, I'm very much looking forward to finding a way to get some more resources for all this equipment issues that we have with trade and security and domestic content. These things are important. They're not going to go away. And I think we're going to have more and more workload drivers. Again, so work closely with your ADOs on Buy American BABA issues. Follow the instructions and give us feedback on what you find on the website. And we do know that, how do I put it? It's perplexing. And we feel like we have the answer about what you should do, but it doesn't fill the space of curiosity. And it's one of those government things where I think you're going to be indulging yourself with a bit of confusion. And I know it's a little rough, but one of the issues is that providing a grant and procuring services for a construction project is not the same as buying a load of stuff. And I think that's really kind of where it comes in. No airport just buys a load of equipment for an AIP grant. You're very much likely to be buying a end product. Of course, that's different than an ARF truck or a snow removal equipment. That's different. Those things that are simply equipment, including other ARF equipment, that is a manufactured product, and that would adhere to Buy American because the domestic content amount is higher. It's 60% instead of 55%. Believe that's why we got our way with Buy American. So until such time as it changes, take a look at the website. We're happy to help. Okay. CARES, Chris, ARPA. Anything still left in COVID? That's a really good question. Everything that's under grant is still left in COVID. Every dollar that is under grant that hasn't already been reimbursed, of course, is available under COVID. What is not available are dollars in allocations. Of course, dollars that weren't in allocations, like all our admin is gone, which was a lot to deal with. Okay, that's a Word document, isn't it? Where's my Word? There we go. So the good news is that thanks to the ADOs and the Bill team and all of your clients and yourselves, we were able to get a lot of the COVID allocations under grant. The vast majority were in tens of millions of dollars, not hundreds of millions of dollars delta. Now, mind you, CRISA was already swept. That which was not under grant, CRISA, mostly because somebody declined it. There were maybe a fewer that just didn't answer us. Some of those allocations were very small. Some airports were recovering already. Those did not survive 2021. They evaporated in September 21. So we're only really talking about CARES and ARPA that were affected. But again, if it was money under grant that has not been reimbursed is still available. We're still working out how we can do some of these things, especially if it requires transition to a development addendum. We think we can, we're confident we can. The processes may change a bit because we don't want to risk it coming out from obligation and evaporating. We don't think that'll happen, but we're going to be double sure. So of course, we know that this was the impact of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023. It did rescind very simply. The law is very simple. It's in section 33 and 35, 33 for CARES, 35 for ARPA, I believe. Rescinded unobligated balances of amounts made available under those two laws, called out to a fairly well. So if you signed a grant agreement prior to FRA, rest assured your funds under those COVID relief grants are safe. This includes all initial COVID relief grants. This is their initial, sometimes we called them O&M, I think probably to our discredit, but initial CARES grants and initial ARPA grants and initial CRISA grants are all still available for drawdown. These also include CRISA and ARPA concessions rent relief grants. If they are under grant, signature, everybody executed, fully processed. And all executed development addenda vastly about CARES are for approved capital development projects, and all executed state block grants for funds, even if not subawarded. So those are all in cozy little grants, and they were safe from the purge. Until there's a weird anomaly that I learn about later on that makes me a liar. But that is the case. Now, what was rescinded were all funds that were declined by a sponsor. Obviously those are gone. Funds that were allocated to a sponsor, but the sponsor didn't respond. As I mentioned, there may be a few of those. And the one that really hurts and is maybe the most disruptive is matching share. CARES had already been largely depleted, and that CARES funds for match had already been largely depleted, and the optional possibility of CARES funds for multi-year obscure ways in which an argument could be made for match for 2020 grants if they were multi-year, those are gone. If they weren't already gone. But ARPA is now fully gone. The match is gone. So those 16 projects in 13 locations for supplemental 21 that might have been expecting ARPA match, that's not available. That's why you don't want to wait to the summer of 2023 to execute a 2021 supplemental grant. And I don't believe there's really anything we can do about it. We don't have the authority to make any of that 100% match federal share, excuse me. So that is what is the main impact. It is limited, but it is severe for those that are experiencing it. We've already been in discussion with those 13 locations, and we're getting mostly positive things. Yeah, we want the money is what we're getting, so that's good. And of course, we have no access to rescinded funds to make any new obligations, so that is ceased. With the exception of perhaps we won't re-obligate we will simply reallocate funds from a CARES, or I suppose CARES or ARPA initial grant into a development addendum. Now, the reason we did the development addendum in the first place was because we wanted to track more easily, according to our system, development projects. We also wanted to stop sponsors from just starting to build stuff on their airport that might not be NEPA cleared, not be Buy American, not meet all of our procurement requirements, and also maybe screw up the airfield. We didn't really want that to happen. We wanted to say, stop. You can get drawn down on payroll, just send it your stuff, we'll handle it in the headquarters, but you need to talk to the ADO, get ALP approval for any improvements you put on your airfield, regardless of how they're funded. And we also want to see on how you're procuring it. So that is why the development addenda came about and why it gets a separate grant number. It had nothing to do, or certainly did not anticipate a rescission such as this. We do expect or hope and ask that our stakeholders remain engaged and consult the FAQs. CARES, CRISA, ARPA are still there, and other guidance when submitting CRISA ARPA concessions plans. Those are all obligated. If there's a signed grant agreement, all we need to do is get an approved plan and we can process a drawdown. Those are going slow. Our staff is overwhelmed. I think that finally we got some interest in the airport community to do these grants when they started worrying about rescission, and so now we've got a flood of them. So again, I ask you to do it and then have patience with us, but we're upping our resources to get that done. Of course, we want to procure and contract correctly, including Buy American, Veterans Preference, Prevailing Wage, and 2 CFR 200. Of course, that also applies with all alternative delivery methods, especially as they apply to Buy American, Veterans Preference, and Prevailing Wage. All of this has to do correctly because all of this is federal assistance. Also, it's very, very important to remember, just because this money was not rescinded doesn't mean the period of performance does not apply. The period of performance tolls at the beginning of the initial grant. So CARES grants periods of performance have a 2020 very likely. So that means they're going away in 2024. 4-year period of performance is what's in the grant agreement. It's what's in the FAQs. So that is still a sword over the neck of these projects. These need to get under grant and underway, and period performance means we can't reimburse after that expires unless there's an unforeseen reason, that is extreme reason. Unforeseen reason is not one you're telling us before you execute the grant addendum, guys. I mean, that's a foreseen. We need to have unforeseen. It's like the invisible snakes. If you see it, it's not unforeseen. So that is something else to help your clients with. And of course, request reimbursement for eligible spending promptly, whether it be development or regular operating expenses. We're very happy to do debt service and payroll and all of that. And also make sure you keep up with the regular reporting requirements, including annual reporting and grant closeout. So generally speaking, if you're working a CARES development addendum or ARPA development addendum, your first point of contact is the ADO, because you're touching your airport. If you're just doing an initial CARES COVID program grant for operational costs, you can contact your headquarters team, the CARES team, COVID team. All right, that is all I have. I'm not going to touch on PFC because I've run out of time, but I'm happy to answer more questions.
Anybody with any questions out there? Well, Dave, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate all the information. I think it's very, very helpful for all of us to hear from you.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you for tolerating my no visual cues. I don't know. I feel like I'm visual enough.
I think so. No, thanks for being on again. And now I'd like to pass it on to Allie, who's going to give us an update on some government affairs going on. Allie, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, so it's been a busy couple of weeks, and I'm sure it's going to be busy next couple of months in Congress on these issues. But the first thing is, as folks probably know, and as Dave mentioned, last week Congress passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which addressed the debt limit. This suspends the debt limit through January 1st, 2025. So taking that leverage point and possible crisis point off the table for a little over a year and a half. The president signed the bill. And the biggest things here, one, it sets the budget caps for the next two fiscal years with, depending on how you do your math, slight decreases to non-defense spending. It does, as Dave mentioned, rescind some unobligated COVID-19 relief, but with limited effect on FAA. The bill, as it is written, would also trigger an automatic 1% cut to spending limits or spending levels if there is not a full package of spending bills for FY24 in place by January 1st. So if they're still operating on a CR for any agencies, there'd be a 1% cut after the first of the year. And then the bill also included some other broad policy changes, including related to NEPA. And so we've got a guest here with us today to talk about that. We've got Katie Van Heuven with us, and Katie's an attorney at Kaplan.
Allie, I don't know if anybody else, did anybody else hear Allie? I've lost her audio.
I lost her too.
Yeah, I lost her audio.
Well, I'll quickly introduce Katie then. Katie is a partner at Kaplan, Kirch and Rockwell and has been representing airports for 20 years. Katie is an expert on a broad range of environmental and land use issues who specializes in airport and transportation projects. She frequently advises clients on projects involving federal environmental reviews under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and related local land use regulations. Katie has extensive experience advising airport sponsors on matters involving compliance with FAA rules and regulations applicable to planning and environmental review for major airport projects. Katie, welcome. Well, I can't hear Katie either, unless I'm the only one.
Nope, can't hear her either.
You can hear
Nope. Katie, come in.
How about now?
Very
Can you
good.
hear me
We can
over?
hear you now.
All right. So I'm having all kinds of Zoom issues. So I am going to, oh, now I can hear myself in multiple places. Give me 1 second so I don't lose my mind.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have to pretend like you're on the radio or on TV and have to try and listen to people in your ear while you're speaking.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you well.
Excellent. I will beat the technology today. So hi, everyone. I'm Katie Van Heuven. For those of you who participated in ACC's Environment and Planning Group call yesterday, I apologize because this is going to be a bit of a revamp. But let me jump right in. Thank you again for the invitation to talk about the NEPA changes in the debt ceiling relief bill. So let me just start by setting the stage. NEPA itself as a statute was passed over 50 years ago, and the statute as initially passed was sort of very broad brush principles. And in the really ensuing 50 years, most of the interpretation came both from agency regulations from Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ, out of the White House. Other agencies published their own regulations. Some agencies like FAA didn't do their own regulations, but had guidance documents. And then, of course, the courts have been interpreting the NEPA statute, for these 50 years. And we really didn't have a lot of change to the landscape until 2020, when the Trump administration overhauled the NEPA rules themselves. And, in a great broad brush stroke, let me just say, in general, the Trump rules sought to streamline and limit the extent of NEPA. Those rules were passed in 2020 when the Biden administration came in. It announced it was going to take a two-part step to update the rules and revisit them. It's already published and finalized its initial rulemaking, which sort of rescinded three key issues that it cared a lot about out of the Trump rules, notably restoring agency control over the scope of alternatives and not limiting them to just what a particular project sponsor wanted to do, restoring review of indirect and cumulative and direct impacts, and restating that the federal CEQ regs would be a floor, not a ceiling for what agencies wanted to do. The Biden administration has also announced that it had planned to issue its phase 2 rulemaking, which has not come out yet. So what happened with the debt ceiling relief bill? We see a fair number of changes to the existing statute and a lot of new language put in. And I think a lot of people had sort of a general freak out of, oh my goodness, they've totally overhauled the statute. And I think it's important to remember first and foremost that a fair amount of what got put in at the statutory level actually doesn't change the playing field. A lot of it is imports the kind of concepts that courts have been developing over the last 50 years. Other parts of it incorporate parts of the rulemaking that came in under the Trump administration. So this has been the playing field for the last couple of years. What that will do is, of course, limit this administration and future administrations to go back and tinker with rules to the degree that it would conflict with the language that was just passed. But let me hit some just highlights of the changes that we see. Some of them fall in the boring category, I think. You know, there are a fair number of sort of line item edits, adding concepts of reasonableness and feasibility. And this we've seen in court cases throughout the world and throughout the United States, and shouldn't be pretty shocking to anybody that those concepts of reasonableness and feasibility are pretty well understood within the context of the statute right now. The second sort of big category of changes that we now see in the statute, which have been in the regs since 2020, were a lot of these different provisions designed to streamline NEPA. So it has to do with concepts of one federal decision, you know, making sure you have a clearly defined lead agency and not all kinds of different agencies running around doing their own different thing. There's the language about limiting the time for the review of NEPA documents, 2 years for an EIS, 1 year for an EA, page limits for NEPAs. All of this has been the lay of the land since the Trump administration passed its NEPA regulations in 2020. So again, not a seismic change right now in terms of what we've been doing, certainly for the last couple of years. A couple of changes that remain consistent with the Trump rules, but I think are particularly interesting for airports, have to do with who gets to prepare an EIS. When the Trump rules came out, they included language in a permissive style, so saying may, you know, agencies may permit sponsoring entities to prepare an EIS itself. As many of you know, FAA has been zealously protecting its right to control EISs and not letting sponsors do that. And there were a lot of questions when the Trump rules passed about whether FAA sort of, you know, would take up that issue. But the language was really permissive and not mandatory, and we haven't really seen that happen. The new statutory language that comes in shifts that may to shall and says agencies shall adopt rules that identify the circumstances under which sponsors of projects can prepare EISs. And that's a big deal, I think, for airports. I have been talking with folks who have been communicating with FAA staff to say, what do you think that's going to mean? And at least the preliminary feedback that we've gotten is FAA is going to look at for circumstances where it makes sense to allow sponsors to engage on an EIS level, but they're not going to give a hall pass to everybody. And that makes sense. I mean, one of the benefits of the way that FAA currently does this, by keeping it essentially in-house and having the consultant work directly for FAA, gives them legal protection. And this is particularly helpful, you know, if there's going to be ensuing litigation. It gives the agency the cover to have frank discussions with its consultant, and for the consultant to have frank conversations back of saying, you shouldn't do that because that might not be defensible. Those are the kind of things we don't like seeing in the public record. And I fully support the agency's, you know, thought process about, you know, what benefits and what detriments will there be to giving up that sort of rule of thumb of always having those EISs prepared in-house by FAA. The second thing that we, again, was foreshadowed in the Trump 2020 rules that is now codified in the statute is the concept of that small federal handle exception. So in the Trump rules, for the first time this concept of let's look at the NEPA trigger itself. And the NEPA trigger itself is we have to do an environmental review for any major federal action. And the Trump rules started getting at limiting what is a major federal action with language talking about, well, if the federal involvement is so nominal, maybe this isn't a major federal activity anymore. And we see similar language like that coming in through the definition section in the new statutory language. So I'll read the exceptions to you. So, the term major federal action does not include a non-federal action with no or minimal federal funding. It means, major federal actions are now limited to actions that are subject to substantial federal control and responsibility. And I think the flaw of this language is, comparable to concerns we had about language in the 2020 NEPA rules, and that is, what do these words mean? What is a substantial federal control, and what is minimal federal funding? And I think that's going to be difficult, and it's going to have to be hashed out, and we're going to spend a fair amount of time, figuring out what the lines of that limit now is. Let me shift forward. There's a couple of new things in the statute that we haven't seen before that are probably of particular interest to this community. One is, again, we have these deadlines, the 2 years for the EIS, the 1 year for the EA. They now newly define that though the clock starts ticking at the earliest of several enumerated dates, one of which is the one we've seen play out in practice, the notice of intent. But now there's a new one that says the moment at which the agency decides what level NEPA review is appropriate. And so I don't really know what that means. We don't really have a formal decision in place now. I'm sure we will end up with a new determination that will be withheld as long as possible in order to maximize the amount of time agencies have to prepare documents, but it's kind of an intriguing shift. The second one is, I think, really interesting for consultants who are preparing NEPA documents, and that is an express permission in the statute that not only can you use categorical exclusions that have been enumerated and identified by your particular agency, but you can go and cherry pick a CADEX from any other federal agency anywhere. And I think that's going to be particularly interesting in this industry, because we're going to have to look out there and see who has been saying things. Now, obviously, I think the DOT modal agencies are the best place to start for relevant stuff, but it's going to provide us with some interesting opportunities to find CADEX relief in squarely different areas that we haven't thought about before because they have never been enumerated by FAA. Last but not least is a new provision entitled e-NEPA, which kind of makes me giggle. And it's a direction from Congress that CEQ should study how we can help speed up NEPA processes by putting everything online. So, all of your public comments, all of your responses, all of the documentation, somehow all staying online. Actually, I think industry groups like ACC are well positioned to provide helpful advice on whether and to what degree an e-NEPA concept is actually helpful or harmful. And so I think it'll be interesting to follow up and see what CEQ does with this and what other agencies, how they comment on it. Let me stop there. That's sort of, my review of the greatest hits of the new NEPA language. But I want to say a couple of comments because I had really interesting and thoughtful questions in yesterday's session. The biggest one was, what does the new language on a sponsor can prepare an EIS mean? And again, I'll reiterate what I said before. I think we're going to have one-off conversations with FAA, and FAA is going to look at this on a case-by-case basis. If I were a betting gal, I would say if you have an EIS that is going to be highly controversial, there is not going to be a chance that FAA is going to be comfortable permitting a sponsor to prepare that. But if you somehow manage to end up with an EIS that doesn't have, potential litigation where everything is relatively straightforward, that may be the case where FAA is going to be willing to consider that, but it's going to be a conversation. The second question I got asked, which makes a lot of sense to me, is, well, what happens to a project that's underway right now? The statute just changed. my answer to that today is probably a little bit better than yesterday's off the cuff, but I was thinking about it, and I think if you're already underway, most of these issues have been resolved. You figured out who the lead agency is, maybe you already have a notice of intent and your clock is ticking and all those kind of things, such that the passage of this law isn't going to be particularly exciting. If you're really at the onset of the project, it may be helpful in terms of speeding things along. You know, maybe nobody's issued an NOI, but you can sort of flag the agency down and say, hey, you've already determined this is an EA, so your clock is starting, and let's go. And then the other question that I was asked was, you know, what else is coming? Is Congress going to do anything else? We all know that nobody knows the answer to that question. I mean, NEPA is of enough significance that it made its way into the debt ceiling bill, and that should speak for itself. Does Congress have anything else that didn't make it into this and that got negotiated out? I don't know. I think it's more interesting to see what the Biden administration does with this, because again, they had previously promised a rollout of their phase 2 regulations. Some of this new statutory language will limit opportunities for them to do some things, because again, the regulations have to be consistent with this new statutory language. I think what's also interesting is even before this passed, the Biden administration had extended the date until September, I think it's 14th of this year, for everybody to get their regs and guidance documents up to speed. That is fast approaching, and I'm wondering if they will give an additional extension on that, arguably to take into account the new statutory language. And who knows, we may see something that's very transportation focused on NEPA projects or FAA specific projects and FAA reauthorization. You know, it's always a political win for people to say, I did something that made NEPA faster, because that, you know, that's an easy thing for us all to agree about. How we actually get it done, you know, starts to splinter the group. But let me stop there and see if there are any questions.
Anybody, feel free to write questions in the chat. I'll give it one more minute here. I know we are a couple minutes after the hour though, so we might just be getting to the end. Well, Katie, seeing none, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an update. I thought that was really interesting. We'll have to probably learn even more about things as we go forward. Well, with that, seeing that we're about 6 minutes after the hour, we are going to wrap it here. I think we got so much wonderful information today, and we might need a supplemental Washington update coming up the next couple of weeks, especially because we are expecting to see an FAA reauthorization bill from the House, perhaps as soon as next week, with the Senate bill coming hopefully soon after. The plan is for the ACC FAA Reauthorization Committee to meet again shortly after those two bills come out, to come up with a plan moving forward to give our opinions on what we need to do to push forward our agenda as ACC with FAA reauthorization. So stay tuned. There will be another call soon. We'll get you more information on what's going on with FAA reauthorization very shortly, especially when we see that House bill come out next week. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Please make sure to go and check us out on LinkedIn and be part of the Advocacy Committee. And we will see you again soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks all.
When will the slides be available, TG? The recording be available?
Yes, the ACC Weekly will have a link provided there. Also, we'll have this posted on the ACC Advocacy Committee website from the ACC website.
Okay. All right, be looking for it. Thank you.
All right, thanks all.
Thank you.